Former NSA contractor Edward Snowden is shedding new light on his decision to reveal classified documents about the U.S. government's mass surveillance program. Back in 2013, Snowden disclosed government programs that collected Americans' emails, phone calls, and internet activity, all in the name of national security.
That balloon posed no threat to American national security, the Biden administration claimed. Why? Because the balloon never transmitted data back to China. Now, how could officials know that? They never explained. Nor did they say whether the Chinese military would send one of its aircraft all the way to the U.S. without a satellite uplink. Apparently, the Chinese just forgot. They're not very good at technology.
Well, what the report has said that was released last month that, according to sources, there were hackers from foreign governments or foreign groups that gained access to systems for facilities that were connected to the American electricity grid. Now, that includes conventional power plants, but also one nuclear plant called Wolf's Creek, which, as you mentioned, is based in Kansas.
Administration has confirmed that China has been operating a spy base in Cuba since at least 2019. It's located about 100 miles from Florida. This comes after the Wall Street Journal reported that China tentatively agreed to pay Cuba billions of dollars to set up an electronic eavesdropping facility.
Welcome. I'm Paul Viollis, and this is Fact-Based News. And as you just saw, our director and assistant director spent a lot of time putting together that B-roll that speaks volumes to the subject that we are going to encroach upon today. And that is the reality of terrorism on American soil. And it all starts with a question. That's right. It starts with a question. And it's going to end with the same one. And that is this. The mantra, at least our mantra as Americans since 9/11, is never forget. So I ask you, and I've got my own opinion about that, about what we've done as a country since then, but I ask you to ask yourself, have you forgotten? Think about it. Because what we're going to get into right now is we're going to start off by defining what terrorism is. Real short and sweet, but at least we know we're on the same page. And from there, we're going to break down international terrorism, and we're going to break down domestic terrorism. Who's committing it, what they're doing before they commit it, the red flags they're showing you right now in your communities, what's happening on our soil, and most importantly, what you can do about it. Shortly, we're going to be joined by a dear friend and one of, by far, our country's finest law enforcement officers and executives, Dennis Franks. He's going to join us shortly. But what we're going to do today, ladies and gentlemen, is answer that question. And we're going to break it down by the facts, by the numbers. I'm going to share with you hard empirical data as to the frequency. Right now, you may be asking yourself, well, have I forgotten? Well, think about it. What's happened since 9/11? Where did our attention go? What are we talking about today? How often are we really talking about Al-Qaeda, ISIS, creating cells here in our country? What's happening with respect to social media and how it's being used? Well, without further ado, let's start to break this thing down. International terrorism, according to the FBI, and I use that because that is our benchmark location for our definitions today, is going to be the FBI and or Justice Department and or Department of Homeland Security. Excuse me. International terrorism is defined as violent criminal acts committed by individuals and or groups who are inspired by or associated with designated foreign terrorist organizations or nations, state-sponsored. You see that up on your screen. That's international terrorism. Domestic terrorism, violent or criminal acts committed by individuals and or groups to further ideological goals stemming from domestic influences such as those of a political, religious, social, racial, or environmental nature. So when we start to really understand what they are, ladies and gentlemen, let's break down their business model. Let's break down their game plan. Let's look at their playbook. The business model for international terrorists, the ones we look at today, the most prolific, Al-Qaeda, clearly. The Taliban, no question. ISIS, yes. Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab. Those are the heavy hitters. those are the ones that are clearly setting up cells in the United States on our soil. We know that to be true. But their business models changed, ladies and gentlemen. It has a lot to do with us, right? It's gone from a centralized management structure, or you have bin Laden on the top and you have his captains, lieutenants, etc. It doesn't exist anymore. You threw that out. It went to a decentralized management structure, broken down by small cells or organizations, 3, 4, sometimes 5, maybe more, but rarely. And they're located everywhere. And they're set up and funded, believe it or not, through communications over social media, which we're going to get into in a minute. We've gone from those small cells to now, as you will see as I break down the chain of events, we've gone to lone wolves. And again, where they're being trained, how they're being trained, where they're living, and some stats are going to come up here in 2 or 3 minutes that are really going to shock you as to where they're living and where they're from. It's really going to shock you. It did me when I thought about it. Domestic terrorism. Now here's an interesting one. Domestic terrorism, if you really, and I gave you the definition, but think of groups that are fueled by one thing as their benchmark, and that is hate. That is clearly hate. Now, statistically, we've got 703 identified hate groups, organized groups in the United States. If you don't think we have a hate problem, you're mistaken. 231 domestic terrorist incidents between 2010 and 2021. 35% of those were racially or ethnic based, 32% were anti-government. Obviously those two making up the lion's share. Some numbers that I think we need to throw out here before we get into this a bit more. Since 9/11, and maybe this goes back to that question, have we forgotten? Well, did you know, since 9/11, there have been 89 major terrorist events on U.S. soil. 89. Did you know that? Can you remember them? We're going to talk about a few. In the past 24 months alone, the FBI's domestic terror caseload has increased over 200%, from 1,000 to 2,700. But we're not talking about it. Have we forgotten? Do we have our eye on the ball? Since 9/11, several hundred Americans and people residing inside the United States have been charged with jihadist terrorism, which is going to lead me to a question I'm going to answer here in less than a minute, and that is, so who are they? Since 9/11, jihadists have killed 107 people on our soil. 107. And you know, there's a lot of people that look back and they can't even remember what's happened since 9/11. Well, it's happening. So who are they? Where are they coming from? How often does it happen? Here's the interesting thing. So as I first pulled out this research, and I wasn't sure if I was correct on this, so I spent a good amount of time verifying this one fact. And the fact is that since 9/11, only one terrorist incident that we talked about, initiated from international terrorists, that occurred on American soil, was perpetrated by a foreign national. All the rest by individuals born and bred right here. Anwar al-Awlaki, an American-born cleric who became a leader in Al-Qaeda, made a statement that jihad is becoming as American as apple pie. That's true. Since 9/11, and think about this, while a range of citizens in our country have been fueled by hate and have moved to the domestic terrorism side, so many have moved to the international terror side, which has prompted us to focus more on American citizens lining up with Islamic radicalists than those born and bred outside the United States. It's a fact. How? Online radicalism. Now we start to merge the two between international terrorists and domestic terrorists. Online radicalization. What does that mean? It means that, and you know as well as I do, that we are at a crossroads in this country relative to this omnipresent question of our right to privacy, which I'm not going to get into right now. Whether we have it or we don't, whether it's constitutionally protected or whether it's not, separate episode. Tune in for that one. But what I am going to talk about right now is the question to you. If you could make a significant dent in international or terrorist-related actions against Americans on American soil by allowing police to patrol social media, would you approve? Knee-jerk reaction to that is no. And that's okay. But by making that decision, the onus is upon us to accept part of the responsibility, because international terrorists, domestic terrorists, state-by-state militia, 703 hate groups are all using social media to recruit, to plan, to train, and to execute attacks on American soil. So I ask you, at what point are we going to huddle up as Americans and realize we need to shut off that valve of information? It's a good question. And it's a fact. So we just have to figure out what direction we want to take with that. But that's a fact. A couple of, let's just say a sampling of some of the things that have happened here on American soil. Now we know what happened obviously on September 11th, but do you remember these? December 22nd, 2001, the failed shoe bomb attempt. How about June 1st, 2008, the Arkansas recruiting office shooting? Do you remember that? March 6, 2008, the Times Square bombing. December 25th, Christmas Day 2009, Northwest Airlines Flight 253. How about August 5th, 2012, the Wisconsin temple shooting? April 13th, and I'm just giving you a sample here, 2014, Overland Park Jewish Community Center shooting. June 17th, 2015, and you saw this on your B-roll, Charleston church shooting. Do you remember that? Do you remember how shocked we were, how appalled we were that an individual could go into a church and massacre people? And how irate we were as a country? And how quickly we forgot. Fact. June 12, 2016, the Orlando nightclub shooting. Perpetrator, American born and bred. Actually a licensed security guard in the state of Florida, licensed to bear arms, licensed to exercise deadly physical force in the state of Florida. Fact. Showed all the red flags we're going to talk about today. Fact. During the post-shooting and the investigation, and federal investigators were swamped with information pointing in the direction of people saying they're not surprised it was him. I can go on and on. I'm not going to. You see it on your screen. It'll be in our library at factbasednews.com. You'll see it. These are a sampling of the cases. Suffice to say, it is happening domestic, and it is happening from international terrorists. It's happening on U.S. soil. It has not slowed down. It has increased dramatically, as evidenced by the number I gave you as far as the caseload of just the FBI and how that's gone up. So as we break this down a little bit further, I'm going to turn to one of our valued analysts here at FBN, someone I consider to be a dear friend, and that is former FBI Supervisory Special Agent Dennis Franks. Dennis is also the founder and president of Investigative and Security Global Solutions, a phenomenal corporation based out of Texas with a global reach. And he joins us today to talk about this particular issue. No one better than somebody who served this country on this subject. Dennis, thank you so much for taking the time to join today, man.
Well, I want to thank you for bringing this information, for synthesizing the information and bringing it to our attention, because I think it is very important that the public become aware of these salient facts that you're pointing out in the trend that we're looking at.
And you know what's scary, Dennis, is that when we break this thing down, when I just lay out a couple of these cases, the fact remains that people are going to scratch their heads. Not that they don't care, and I'm not saying Americans don't care. That's the last thing I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is I think we have lost that passion about never forget. But that's the question we threw out there. So I'm going to start off with this. Based on your background, Dennis, how real is this threat?
It's very real. And I'm going to begin by saying this. When I was in the FBI, and there are some things I can't talk about, but I do feel comfortable talking about this. For a period of years, several years, I supervised our special operations group, and part of our responsibility was actually conducting surveillance on suspected foreign terrorists. And among those were some that we knew had been to terrorist training camps in other countries. They came to the US, they settled in, they looked normal, they had jobs and everything. And probably 2 or 3 of those ended up getting indicted for some acts they took. But a large part of them never did anything as far as I know. And I kind of had this theory, and not only this theory, but we realized over time that the ones who were the most dangerous were becoming radicalized, were US citizens who were becoming radicalized. I think some of these foreign terrorists, and who knows, they may be sleeping for decades before they commit an act. But I think they came to the US and realized, wow, this is not a bad country after all. I mean, I've got a good life. I've got people are friendly. They're nice to me. It's some of the homegrown radicals who carried out more of the acts. You know, the Boston bombers. Now they had some foreign ties and everything, but there were others who recruited in prison. And I have this term that whether it's terrorism, domestic, foreign, or whatever, is there are certain number of people who just have this malcontent, and they are malcontents looking for a cause. And you know, international terrorists have been good at being able to recognize that and grab them and get them involved. And they have been the most dangerous ones, in my opinion, except for the big acts like 9/11.
Now, you've done this, so tell our audience, how is intelligence gathered on both groups, whether it be international terrorists or domestic terrorists? How is information, obviously, you can't share everything, and we respect that, but from what you can share, how is intelligence gathered on them? Well,
obviously, there are certain techniques, technical techniques gathered across the world that are come into play, and they are essential. They're very important. When they're court authorized and when they're involving extremists in other countries. But it all comes down to, in my opinion, to human intelligence being the most valuable. We have CIA officers and other intelligence officials working in overseas gathering information. We have FBI agents in other countries who are working for focusing on the U.S. and what's going on here in counterintelligence, and developing sources who will, people who want to talk to you and will talk to you is absolutely crucial to get information that is needed. You just can't, rely on the eyes in the sky, the ears in the sky. You've got to have that real-time personal information that you have to corroborate it. Absolutely. You can't just take, for granted that is absolutely crucial to human intelligence.
Now, both of us come from the intelligence world. So for our audience, would you explain, you hit it, right on the head there, but can you explain human intelligence? Because I think it's so important for our audience to understand. They've heard about it, they've seen it on TV and heard about it in movies, but what is human intelligence?
Well, I'll give you an example. As an FBI agent, you were, back when I was on duty, you were responsible for developing informants, cooperating witnesses, and assets as part of your job, whether it's criminal or any other matters. And for a while, also supervised an intelligence group that focused on developing assets, informants, cooperating witnesses, whatever terminology applies. It's going out and I'll just try to relate some personal examples. Is whatever there's something going on that's not right in certain areas, whether it's criminal, terrorism, you start on the periphery and you try to develop information about what's going on in the inner circle. You identify people that knows things are related in some way or in this circle, and it may be an outer circle, and then you work your way in. And the best way to develop these sources is just to go out and talk to them, befriend them. You don't have to be heavy-handed or anything. You just talk to them. People essentially want to do the right thing. I mean, I could give you examples that whatever their beliefs, their nationalities, their religious beliefs, ultimately, most people, except a certain percentage, really want to do the right thing. So that's what you work with. You work with people that really want to do the right thing, and they will help. They absolutely do help.
The game plan for domestic terrorists versus international terrorists, is it the same? Is it different? How would you compare and contrast that?
Well, I think just there's statistics that in 2022 and for the first 8 months of the year, there were 100 incidents where power plants were attacked, shootings, and I think you can, based on the information about witnesses who saw who was doing it, it's probably domestic terrorism, disrupting power plants, things of that nature. There's been a really uptick in the 2022 and this year in a number of chemical plants, food producing, companies that have explosions and fires. Now, there are a certain percentage of these that occur regularly, but there's certainly an uptick in this. Is it domestic terrorism? Is it foreign terrorism? We don't know yet. Or is it foreign actors? I think it could be a combination. And so anything that disrupts our normal course of business, I think the international terrorism, they want to focus on things that will disrupt our economy, our ways of lives. Domestic terrorism, they want to make statements to create their own dialogue. And I'm going to go out kind of on a limb here because I think there could be a chance that there could be an increase in cooperation. They may have, opposed, views. And the reason I say this is because I worked drug cartels for, a decade or 2 decades. And what I realized is this business model. They started working together, whether it was Colombian cartels, the Cali, the Medellin, the Mexican cartels. They started working with the Mexican cartels to bring the shipments into the U.S. because they were rivals, but yet they realized what's going to be effective and efficient. And it just wouldn't surprise me to see domestic terrorists somehow, conspiring or combining with international terrorism, not to accomplish, a certain single objective, but what's going to work for both of them.
Okay, so suffice to say, right, this occurs everywhere. There's no jurisdiction in the United States you could move to where the risk is not present.
Right, and it's these rural areas. I mean, look at the, I don't know what's causing them, but all the train derailments, they're in rural areas, but they create havoc. It can be anywhere. Okay,
so last question, and then I've got, believe it or not, we were advertising that you were on, and we had a number of viewers that wrote in and were asking me to ask you a certain question. So I'm going to throw that in a second. What can all of our viewers incorporate now in their lives if you had to take 10 or 15 seconds right now off the top of your head as far as red flags? We hear and we say, as law enforcement, we say, if you see something, say something. But What are those red flags that you should pick up the phone and call the FBI hotline, to call the local sheriff's department, the local police department, whatever?
Yeah, it's anything that, there are things that just are not normal or just a little bit aberrant. And a lot of times we'll just glance through it and just make a note and just go, okay, it's just something's a little aberrant. Just, okay, I'm going about my daily life. But if it sticks in your gut, and that's what, that's what it comes down to me, is if something sticks in your gut, if it's something that really resonates that, something's not right here, just that's the time to take note and speak out and to reach out. And it may be nothing, but, God's sakes, it could be something. So that's.
No, I think
it's not a scientific answer, but it's just,
hey, I think you're right on point there. And we're going to switch gears real quick. We're going to go to audience questions. And in this particular case, we had a number of people to write in, with different questions. And one person I said that we're having you on. And Shelley, I said you were from Texas, so Shelley from Dallas wrote in to you to ask the question. And the question is, Dennis, if I really am concerned and I see things that are worrying me and I call the FBI, will they actually answer the phone? Will they help? Do they have time?
That is a really good question because I deal with this now in my business, and I have clients and I have people, with issues that could be criminal acts, and I can't even get in touch with them, quite frankly. There's a process. It's a centralized process. There's a complaint line. There's online. You have to enter the information and send it, and they take it at this information center, and then they send it back to the field offices to disseminate it. And believe me, there's so much there daily. There's just so much going on. I can't, unfortunately, I don't know what gets addressed and what doesn't. Right. But that's the process now.
But suffice to say, it doesn't fall into a black hole.
No,
as with any law enforcement agency, look, when you think about the sheer number of citizens and the small number of officers and agents, right, you're going to get far more questions than you are going to have humans.
Yeah, and it's just like it's a puzzle, and there are pieces on the edge of the puzzle that they may have, and it may take a while before they put this piece and this piece together and start linking things. But it doesn't, I don't want to dissuade anybody from reporting because that is so crucial because it is there. And once it's there, it's important. It can get linked.
And I think the answer is that to Shelley is that, yes, it just takes time.
Yes.
Right. And there is a process. And the reason why I want to just top off that question for Shelley is I think that of late, the FBI has been getting a lot of bad press. Right. And I think that promulgates some of these questions. So just to put our cards on the table with everybody listening to answer to Shelley, the answer to that is yes. Of course they will. But the overarching question, I think that was kind of omnipresent inside and embedded inside your question is do they really care at this point based on what you saw? And I will tell you that the FBI, and this isn't coming from Dennis, this is coming from me, the FBI is still the premier law enforcement agency in this country. The agents that are doing the work are impeccable. The selection process to get into the FBI is still extraordinary. And the people doing the work are extraordinary. Do I have a hard time with a lot of the decisions that have been made with executive leadership? Yes. Do I have a hard time with a lot of the things that have happened that are decisions that are made way above the field agent and the supervisory special agent? Yes, I do. But that doesn't mean that their questions are going unanswered. Agreed?
Absolutely, Paul. I appreciate that because I see that now. I mean, I still know of agents and I make new agents and they are just hardworking. They want to do the right, back what I said before, they want to do the right thing. There's this thread that runs throughout those who are chosen for FBI, other law enforcement, police, that they just want to do the right thing and they are out there doing it, working hard day and night with sacrificing and they could probably be making a lot more money doing other things, but they are doing it because they feel it's the right thing to do.
And I think the important thing to take out of that, Shelley, is the answer is yes. The answer is whether it's the FBI or Homeland Security, or whether it's your local police department or sheriff's department, there's a process. But there's a process that will be followed. And your question, your concern will be answered. So by all means, stay with us on that. And at this point, folks, I want to thank Dennis very much for taking the time out of his busy schedule to join us. Dennis, I hope you come back again. Your insight, your expertise, your knowledge, your commitment to this country is unparalleled, brother. And I cannot thank you enough for everything that you shared.
Paul, I want to thank you so much for what you're doing. I really appreciate it. It's very meaningful. This is needed. What you're doing is needed. And any way I can contribute, I certainly will.
Well, we are going to be hitting you back. So stay with us, okay?
Okay.
All right, so we're going to switch to the board right now as we close up for the day. And I'm going to lay some things out right now that are critical. Then I ask you to stay with me on this. So let's go to the board. Number one, no community is exempt. I beseech you, remember this when I am telling you, no community is exempt. They're just not. No matter where you live, this happens. Cells set up. Domestic and or international terrorists have moved throughout the United States. So please don't think because you live in a certain location, you're exempt, because you're not. Number two, remember their respective business models. Dennis touched on this, and I'm going to briefly touch on it again. But it's important, you know, our mantra when we talk about the board is so that we leave you with something, not just go to factbasednews.com and go to the library. All of our documents are there, but that we leave you with this. Number two, again, remember their respective business models. International went from centralized to decentralized, to small cells to lone wolf. And they're migrated throughout the United States, and the majority of them are US citizens. So that's why when we get into red flags, it's important you get involved. It's important you get involved. In domestic terrorists, 703 hate groups in the United States, ladies and gentlemen. They're all over the place, fueled by hate. I'm going to ask you this question. What's a more powerful emotion, love or hate? What is a more powerful emotion, love or hate? I want you to write us. I want to know. We all here at Fact-Based News want to know your answer to that. Number three, intelligence gathering is a daily, lifelong commitment, but it's a commitment you can help with. Remember what Dennis was talking about relative to how intelligence is garnered. Human intelligence, the effort, the time, the energy that goes into it, the multiple sources that go into gathering intelligence and staying on top of it. But you, ladies and gentlemen, are key. Don't think you're not. You are. Shelley's question was great. It was on point. We covered a lot of stuff in that, and I'm glad we did. You know, you got to talk about that stuff right now, and we did, and that's good. We covered it. We cleared the air. But you are critical. Do not think you're not. This is happening on our soil, which is why I go to number four. Remember the red flags. Number one, under remember the red flags. Social media post patrol. Ladies and gentlemen, we as a country have to make a decision, and that decision is, do we want to take the handcuffs off police and let them patrol social media? Or do you want social media to have no boundaries as it does today and allow terrorists, domestic and international, to continue to recruit, train, and execute unfettered? Your call. Ideological, political, religious, hate-filled rants. Another red flag. If people around you, could be a neighbor, could be a coworker, could be somebody down the block, could be a friend, could be a family member. Remember the guy in Miami and the Pulse nightclub shooting? They're going to show these rants. Take note of that. Again, red flags you can watch out for. Behavioral changes in appearance, or switch in religion, extreme political views, decline in hygiene, change in affiliations. These are red flags in behavior that are going to be glaring. You start putting one after the other. This is the answer to your question. How do I know when to call? When you're seeing all of these things. And threatening or alarming statements. Take it seriously. Don't be the one that says, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't do anything about that. Because there's no redos, there's no do-overs at that point. You knew you did nothing. Don't live with that. Ask people that do, not the place you want to go. And last but not least, keep your word, ladies and gentlemen, and never forget. For people like me that were there, that still remember 9/11 and what it looked like and what it smelled like, the deafening sounds and the deafening silence. For those of us that were there, I'm sure we won't forget. So I ask you not to. And I know that we're filled with a million different things. I know we have a whole ton of stuff we're contending with in our country right now. I get it. But I beseech you, please never forget. And remember the red flags we talked about. Because if you see them and you report them, you're one step closer getting these people off our soil. I'm Paul Viollis, and this is Fact-Based News.